I feel deeply honored and privileged to stand here before you today representing the citizens of the State of Israel. We are an ancient people. We date back nearly 4,000 years to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We have journeyed through time. We've overcome the greatest of adversities. And we reestablished our sovereign state in our ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. Now, the Jewish people's odyssey through time has taught us two things. Never give up hope. Always remain vigilant. Hope charts the future. Vigilance protects it. Some 2,500 years ago, the great Persian king Cyrus ended the Babylonian exile of the Jewish people. He issued a famous edict in which he proclaimed the right of the Jews to return to the land of Israel and rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. That's a Persian decree. We want peace based on security and mutual recognition, in which a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the Jewish state of Israel. I remain committed to achieving an historic reconciliation and building a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Now, I have no illusions about how difficult this will be to achieve. 20 years ago, the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians began. 6 Israeli prime ministers, myself included, have not succeeded at achieving peace with the Palestinians. My predecessors were prepared to make painful concessions. So am I. But so far, Palestinian leaders haven't been prepared to offer the painful concessions they must make in order to end the conflict. For peace to be achieved, the Palestinians must finally recognize the Jewish state, and Israel's security needs must be met. I am prepared to make an historic compromise for a genuine and enduring peace, but I will never compromise on the security of my people and of my country, the one and only Jewish state. Together we've transformed a bludgeoned Jewish people, left for dead, into a vibrant, thriving nation, defending itself with the courage of modern Maccabees, developing limitless possibilities for the future. In our time, the biblical prophecies are being realized. As the prophet Amos said, they shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruit. And I will plant them upon their soil, never to be uprooted again. ושבתי את שבות עמי ישראל, ובנו ערים נשמות וישבו, ונטו כרמים ושתו את יינם, ועשו גינות ואכלו את פריים, ונטטים על אדמתם, ולא ינטשו עוד. Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Israel have come home, never to be uprooted again.
Behold, the days come, said the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him that soweth seed. And the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt. And I will bring again the captivity of my people of Israel. And they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them, and they shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. And I will plant them upon their land, and they shall no more be pulled up out of their land which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God.
So dig this. A man was bulldozing a bog in central Ireland the other day when he noticed something unusual in the freshly turned soil. Turns out he'd unearthed an early medieval treasure, an ancient book of Psalms that experts date to the years 800 to 1000. Experts say it will take years of painstaking work to document and preserve this book, but eventually it will go on public display. Now here's the kicker. The book, about 20 pages of Latin script, was allegedly found open to Psalm 83. Now, if you're a scholar, as you know, Psalm 83, God hears complaints that other nations are plotting to wipe out the name of Israel.
The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens, and layeth the foundation of the earth, and formeth the spirit of man within it. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it.
The United Nations is appealing for peace in Gaza. The Security Council called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. And the Secretary General says the Gaza Strip is in critical condition.
The temporary weekend pause in fighting brought a brief respite to war-weary civilians. It also revealed how much the massive Israeli assault has devastated the lives of the people of Gaza. We saw scenes of indiscriminate destruction. Some described it as a man-made hurricane, a whole neighborhood reduced to debris, rubble, blocks of flattened apartment buildings, scores of bodies still buried under mountains of twisted wreckage. The death toll keeps climbing. The fighting has claimed well over 1,000 Palestinian lives, most of them civilians, hundreds of them children. Hamas rocket fire has claimed the lives of 3 Israeli civilians. At least 16 Palestinian civilian deaths and more than 200 injuries came as a result of an appalling assault on a UN school in Beit Hanun. We were sheltering families, women and children who had sought refuge from the fighting. Ongoing hostilities have prevented establishing conclusive responsibility. It is imperative to do so and to have accountability for this outrageous crime. Indeed, there must be accountability and justice for crimes committed by all sides.
Today, we are continuing to work toward establishing an unconditional humanitarian ceasefire, one that could honor Eid, which begins now, and that will stop the fighting, allow desperately needed food and medicine and other supplies into Gaza, and enable Israel to address the threat which we fully understand and which is real, the threat posed by tunnel attacks, and to be able to do so without having to resort to combat. That is what could come from a ceasefire. We believe the momentum generated by a humanitarian ceasefire is the best way to be able to begin to negotiate and find out if you can put in place a sustainable ceasefire, one that addresses all of the concerns, the long-term concerns as well. Begin to talk about the underlying causes of the conflict in Gaza, though those obviously will not all be resolved in the context of a ceasefire, a sustainable ceasefire discussion. But it is important to try to build, to begin, and to move in a process. And that's what we're trying to achieve. That is the only way, ultimately, this conflict is going to be resolved. Hopefully, if we can make some progress, the people in this region who deserve peace can take one step towards that elusive goal by stopping the violence which catches innocents on all sides in the crossfire and begin to try to build a sustainable way forward. We also believe that any process to resolve the crisis in Gaza in a lasting and meaningful way must lead to the disarmament of Hamas and all terrorist groups. And we will work closely with Israel and regional partners and the international community in support of this goal. So we continue to have these discussions. Our discussions over there succeeded in putting a 12-hour humanitarian ceasefire in place.
Well, this has been the strongest push yet from the United Nations, a real concerted effort to try and find peace in Gaza. First, we had the Security Council meeting to call for an immediate ceasefire, and then the Secretary-General, Ban Ki-moon, made a direct appeal to the Israeli and Palestinian leaders, calling on them to show humanity. But so far, it seems the UN's calls to lay down arms have gone unheeded. A few hours before, the UN Security Council met in New York at a hastily arranged midnight emergency session. Members are hoping for a break in the Middle East fighting to deliver humanitarian assistance. This was the Security Council's strongest call yet to try and end the violence in Gaza. But even so, there's some disappointment that they only managed to muster a presidential statement rather than a weightier, more formal resolution. Israel's ambassador condemned the Palestinian militant group Hamas for failing to honour previous ceasefires.
Israel agreed to 5 ceasefire proposals. Hamas rejected or broke all of them, even the ones that they requested by themselves. Every single time the international community called for a ceasefire, we seized and Hamas fired.
The problem is that this presidential statement from the Security Council isn't quite what everyone was expected. When we all broke last week, at the end of last week, we were expecting to have a resolution put forward. A draft resolution was being circulated amongst all of the member states, but it seemed that some of them were unhappy with the language and wanted it watered down, and therefore we have this statement. The problem is that resolutions are much weightier. They're legally binding. A presidential statement is quite simply a suggestion. It's just words on a bit of paper. And at this stage, it seems that the Israelis and Hamas don't want to pay any attention to that suggestion from the Security Council.
Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity, to deliver them up to Edom. But I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, which shall devour the palaces thereof. And I will cut off the inhabitant from Ashdod, and him that holdeth the scepter from Ashkelon, and I will turn mine hand against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, saith the Lord God. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarenes, Gebo and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asser also has joined them. They hope in the children of Lot. Selah.
Do you want to coexist with the state of Israel? Do you want to represent, do you want to recognize Israel as a Jewish state?
No.
Everybody wants us to quickly accept a ceasefire. To them we say, and then what? They answer, then you can negotiate your demands. We have always rejected this method, this principle. We have rejected it from the beginning, and we reject it today, and we will reject it in the future.
I'm joined now by Musab Hassan Youssef. He's the author of Son of Hamas, and he joins us live. You know, your father was a founding member of Hamas, and you were groomed to take a leadership position. Eventually, you converted to Christianity, rejected their political and military objectives. Why did you do that?
Well, for the simple reasons that we see right now in Gaza, that Hamas does not care about the lives of Palestinians, does not care about the lives of Israelis or Americans. They don't care about their own lives. They consider dying for the sake of their ideology a way of worship. And how can you continue in that society?
Okay. I'll ask you the same question I asked my last guest. Can you coexist with someone whose mission is your destruction?
Well, Hamas is not seeking coexistence and compromise. Hamas is seeking conquest and taking over. And by the way, Israel, the destruction of the state of Israel is not Hamas' final destination. Hamas' final destination is building the Islamic Khilafah, which means an Islamic state on the rubble of every other civilization. These are the ultimate goals of the movement.
Musab, you say in your book that Hamas targets civilians as a tool of war. Tell us about the Hamas that you know from growing up in the West Bank.
Well, in the mosques, Hamas taught us that without shedding innocent blood for the sake of the ideology, we won't be able to build an Islamic state. They were preparing us from the age as young as 5 years old. This is the ideology that Hamas was feeding us. And honestly, it's impossible almost for anybody to break through and see the truth of and real face of Hamas and be able to leave at some point. As you see in my case, I had to lose everything just to say no to Hamas. And today when I look at the children of Gaza and I know what they are fed, I know that they have no choice.
Yeah. Musab, thank you.
On one side you have Egypt, and on another side you have Jordan. So what allegedly was going on is in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians or the Hamas was bringing terrorist, whatever, guns, kidnappings through the tunnels from Jordan. You need to stop it. No, through Egypt and Jordan. Sure, Bob. There's only two other sides. One's water, the other's Israel.
I don't want to correct you, but Jordan is way.
Yes, but they were saying that they were bringing the tunnels under the border and getting people from Jordan
all the way
and missiles. Absolutely. Iran and Syria are supplying missiles. Laugh all you want.
I'm not laughing.
After the show, you can Google it, or you can call the Brain Room and find out. Iran and Syria were providing military weaponry, including missiles, through Jordan, through the tunnel system.
Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Kerethites. The word of the Lord is against you. O Canaan, the land of the Philistines, I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. and the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds, and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah, they shall feed thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening, for the Lord their God shall visit them, and turn away their captivity.
We have been watching new airstrikes light up the sky over Gaza as a short-lived ceasefire comes to an end. Israel reports it resumed airstrikes after Hamas militants fired rockets from Gaza following a short break in the fighting at the United Nations urging. Israeli soldiers say militants also slipped into the country through tunnels and opened fire on soldiers.
John, it certainly is. Just the past few hours or so, we've seen a pretty significant escalation in the fighting here, particularly after the weekend, which was fairly calm compared to what we saw last week. And just in the last few hours, we've heard outgoing Hamas rockets. We've seen Israeli airstrikes and artillery. We've also been hearing small arms fire. So the fighting is definitely picking up here. This as the ceasefire and the sort of unofficial truce seem to have essentially crumbled in the last few hours. Now, Israel is also conducting military operations trying to remove those tunnels. We are also hearing about some airstrikes or some reported explosions at this Gazan Shefa hospital, where there's also a park and a medical facility there. Reports there say there was an explosion. Hamas says it was an Israeli airstrike. Israel says no, this was a Hamas rocket that essentially landed in the wrong spot. But what we do know, as they argue about who's responsible, is that 10 people were killed, including 9 children. So the fighting here beginning to impact civilians yet again, something we saw a lot in the last week or so, John. And civilians are being told by Israel to flee the northern part by text message of Gaza. But where they're supposed to go, John, is not really clear. As we've seen the past few days, these safe havens are not very safe, John.
Connor, what more do we know about these militants who supposedly entered Israel?
Well, one of the big operational aims of this goal for the Israeli military is to remove these underground tunnel systems. And the Israeli military says they've destroyed about 60% of these tunnels, but still Hamas is able to use them to infiltrate into Israel. It's happened several times before, and it happened earlier tonight. Now, we don't know how many or what exactly happened after Hamas fighters got into Israel, but we do know that a firefight ensued. At least one of the Hamas fighters was killed. We understand there may be casualties as well on the Israeli side. So as Israel continues to focus on these tunnels, Hamas is also using them to sneak into Israel. It is a major concern for the Israeli military, and that's a primary goal right now of trying to destroy these tunnels, John.
That's publicly available information. It's kind of an important fact for your reporter to mention. And in addition to that, he may have wanted to mention a statement that was made by, not by the Israeli ambassador, not by the spokesman of the IDF, but by the UN Secretary General yesterday. And I want to read you what he said yesterday, not last year, yesterday. He said this: the Secretary General is alarmed to hear that rockets were placed in an UNRWA school in Gaza and that subsequently these have gone missing. He expresses his outrage and regret at the placing of weapons in a UN-administered school. By doing so, now listen, Aaron, exactly what he says. By doing so, those responsible are turning schools into potential military targets and endangering the lives of innocent children, UN employees working in such facilities, and anyone using the UN schools as shelter. This is yesterday. Do you not think that it's relevant to report on CNN that the Secretary General of the United Nations yesterday warned against the use of UN schools and shelter for rocket missile depots of Hamas?
And Ambassador, it is relevant. And let me ask you this,
well,
because of what you said.
But Aaron, I've been listening for 2 hours of reports on CNN. I have seen split screens, horrible pictures that any decent human being would be horrified by. I have not heard a single person say what I just said to you now. And I think that that does a disservice to your viewers to not give them the context they need to make these judgments. Hamas is placing missile batteries in schools, in hospitals, in mosques, and there must be outrage by the world at Hamas to end this.
Obama administration officials are defending Secretary of State John Kerry's bid to secure a ceasefire. a bid that failed over the weekend with an Israeli rejection. The United Nations Security Council is also calling for an immediate and unconditional truce between Israel and Hamas. As correspondent Connor Powell reports from Gaza City, despite efforts to get another deal to the table, the fighting continues.
The lull broken, the conflict resumed. Hamas fired rockets across the border, while Israeli jets pounded Gaza. A brief calm in the fighting, all but forgotten. Civilians once again paying the price. Explosions rocking a park and a medical building near Gaza's main hospital today. Both Hamas and Israel blamed each other. At least 10 Palestinians were killed, 8 of them children. Dozens more were injured. Despite the international pressure to stop the fighting, most Israelis support the war. A poll by the Jerusalem Post newspaper said 86% of Jewish Israelis oppose the ceasefire.
There is no more just war than this one that our heroic sons fight.
But Hamas remains defiant, insisting on its conditions for a ceasefire.
Our people actually lived under the siege of 8 years. This is a collective punishment. We need to lift the siege. We have to have a port. We have to have an airport.
In a sign of a possible expansion of the military operation, Israel sent text messages to residents in northern Gaza, warning them to flee the fighting, even though designated safe areas have proven to be dangerous throughout the conflict. And Israeli planes dropped leaflets in Gaza with a list of Hamas fighters killed. They aim to get people afraid, this man says. No one cares. I think the paper's silly. It doesn't mean anything to the people. Israeli soldiers continue to attack Hamas's vast tunnel system. Commanders say they've destroyed 60% of the underground network. But Hamas fighters were able to infiltrate into Israel today. Both sides suffered casualties. 4 more Israeli soldiers were killed in a mortar attack. Meanwhile, in Washington, Secretary of State John Kerry said the U.S. will continue pressing both sides to halt the fighting.
KT McFarland joins me now, Fox News national security analyst and a former Deputy Secretary of Defense in the Reagan administration. KT, welcome.
Hi.
Very clearly yesterday on Fox News Sunday, both sides laid out in this. Where are we going here?
Well, there will eventually be a ceasefire. I don't think it's going to be in the next 48 hours. Now, why? Because you have a ceasefire when both parties feel that they've gained something and that they've achieved all they're probably going to get. I mean, Henry Kissinger always said famously, you don't negotiate in the Middle East until both sides are ready. And they're not quite ready yet. Why? Israel has these tunnels they want to get rid of. They feel they've probably gotten rid of a lot of the depots of rockets and rocket launchers, but there are these new tunnels that have been discovered. They want to make sure they've closed those off and destroyed those. Hamas, on the other hand, they haven't achieved their objective either, which is to try to turn public opinion against Israel. They know they're not going to defeat Israel on the battlefield, but they think they might defeat Israel in the court of public opinion. But how do they do that? Only by showing a lot of civilian casualties so that they can paint Israel as the aggressor, and the world then isolates and turns against Israel by doing things like divesting in Israeli stocks or calling Israel genocidal killers. And primarily what their goal is to drive a wedge between the United States and Israel. So maybe the United States slow walks any kind of military assistance to Israel for the Iron Dome, for example.
I was reading some of the Israeli newspapers this morning and so critical of John Kerry in many of these papers. How do you think he's doing?
Well, he had said, remember, at the beginning of his tenure as Secretary of State, he said, my main objective is going to be get peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And that hasn't worked out real well, right? They're killing each other. They're fighting pieces further away than ever. So I think part of it is that the raised expectations that he was unable to deliver on. And secondly, what is his role in this? I mean, maybe there will be an American role to play, but right now it's Egypt that's offering the peace agreement, and the Secretary of State historically in any kind of Israeli-Palestinian problem, they offer the checkbook, and we're not quite there yet.
Yeah. You know, when you look at what both sides want, as you say, the tunnels to be destroyed, Israel wants, and Hamas is talking about, and as the woman that Chris Wallace spoke to over the weekend, she said there's several resistance groups, not just Hamas, and she said, you know, they really want to have their borders opened up because they feel like they're living in a prison, and then Benjamin Netanyahu said, yeah, well, if we open the borders, they're going to bring in more concrete, build more tunnels. I mean, it's hard to imagine, KT, how you ever get to any kind of real
conclusion or agreement here.
And I think that's the objective. If people realize that, and so nobody's looking for a lasting peace as much as they're looking for peace to buy a couple of more years of calm, as the Israelis say. One thing that's really struck me is if you watch these interviews, what do you see? What is the split screen? What's the visual that you take away? Well, you have the Israeli politician talking, and then on the other screen, you have the dead women and children in Gaza, where you have the civilian casualties. Hamas is doing this very cleverly. They're not putting Hamas military leaders out to talk, because what's the question we'd all want to ask them? Why are you putting children in front of your missiles? Right. Why are you putting missiles, according to the UN, you're putting missiles in the basements of schools? Why is your headquarters in a hospital first floor? Those questions never get asked. Instead, what we see is the pictures. And that's how Hamas thinks they can continue to prevail. They know they won't do it militarily, but can they turn the world against Israel?
Yeah, Mike Rogers was talking about Iran's involvement with Hamas over the weekend, and what appears to be an emerging competition. Qatar wants to get involved too and help out Hamas. How dangerous is that collective?
Well, that to me is the key. You've asked the key question, which is what happens when all of these anti-Israeli groups get together. If Iran gets together with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with even the Al-Qaeda, they all want the destruction of Israel. You even had the supreme leader of Iran just last week saying the world's going to be a better place without Israel. And so what happens if they all get together and gang up on Israel, and Israel remains isolated in a very dangerous neighborhood at the same time that the Europeans, that the Americans walk away from Israel? That, to me, is the worst possible outcome of all of this, and the prescription for, a major Middle East conflict.
Is there anything that, the president's been criticized a lot for not showing enough leadership in this situation. Is there anything that he can do at this point that would make a difference?
Well, I think you support the Israelis' right. You don't just say, oh, Israel has the right to defend itself, but you give Israel the means by which to defend itself. Help them resupply their Iron Dome facilities. Don't cancel flights. Don't let Israel become so isolated from the world community that talented Israelis leave. That's another thing people are worried about. Will there be a brain drain of talented Israelis who say, I'm an Israeli, but I've got dual citizenship, and I just don't want my family to be subjected to this.
Right. Incredible. KT, thank you very much. Good to see you as always.
Let's bring in Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Prime Minister, first Hamas broke the ceasefire and the fighting resumed. Now Hamas wants a ceasefire. Will Israel accept that, and what happens next?
Well, Hamas has broken 5 ceasefires that we accepted and we actually implemented. They rejected all of them, violated all of them, including 2 humanitarian ceasefires in the last 24 hours. Now they come with their own ceasefire proposal, and believe it or not, they violated even their own ceasefire proposal. They're shooting at us as we speak. So Israel is not obliged and is not going to let a terrorist organization determine when it's convenient for them to fire at our cities, at our people, and when it's not, when they can restock. We'll take the necessary action to protect our people, including, by the way, continue to dismantle the tunnels. That's my policy.
So basically, the offensive, the Israeli offensive in Gaza is going to continue.
We'll do whatever is necessary to achieve our goal, which is to get a sustainable quiet. And as far as Hamas and its so-called ceasefires, they're violating their own ceasefires. It's come to the level of absurdity right now.
Your defense minister has talked this weekend about a significant expansion of the Israeli operation. What does that mean, and how long is it going to take? When will you know that you have achieved your goals?
Well, we'll continue to act until we bring quiet and security to our people. And I think that right now, as long as Hamas continues rocketing our people, attacking us, digging these tunnels under which, you know what they do? They dig. They got money from the international community to build kindergartens. They took that money and built tunnels, dug tunnels to blow up our kindergartens. So we obviously have to dismantle that, and we are. And we'll continue to do it until we achieve our goal of having this security that we can bring to our people. I hope it's as soon as possible, obviously.
Mr. Prime Minister, Gaza officials say now that more than 1,000 Palestinians, the vast majority of them civilians, have been killed. International opposition to your operation, as you well know, is growing. Is that not a concern to you? And what about the protests, even riots on the West Bank? Are you concerned at all about a third intifada or uprising there?
Well, first, I know that's what Hamas is trying to do. They're trying to instigate violence in the West Bank as well, and we expect President Abbas to do what he can to, and what he's responsible for, to keep the quiet on that front, because Hamas just wants that to blow up as well. As far as the civilian casualties, I have to tell you, each one of them is a tragedy. We don't want a single civilian tragedy. We're not targeting a single civilian. And every time you see these pictures, they're heartbreaking. But why is it happening? It's happening because Hamas is firing 25,000 rockets on our cities. They're attacking us with terror tunnels dug into our territory. They're attacking us by land, sea, and air. And obviously, we have to respond. When we respond, Hamas, we are trying to minimize the civilians. We tell civilian casualties. We tell the civilians, leave. Hamas tells them to stay. Why does it tell them to stay? Because it wants to pile up these civilian casualties. So any of these regrettable, tragic civilian casualties should be placed at the responsibility of Hamas. Hamas is a terror organization, ruthless terrorist organization, that not only wants to kill our people, it wants to sacrifice its own people. It uses them as human shields, and therefore it should be blamed and not Israel. That's the truth, and that's a simple clarity, moral clarity that should not be lost in this conflict.
There are demands on both sides, though, sir, and I want to discuss a couple of those with you. Hamas is demanding an end to Israel's economic blockade of Gaza, and in fact, you do block most imports going into the country and all exports leaving Gaza to go either to the West Bank or to Israel. And unemployment in Gaza is now over 50%. Don't they have a legitimate demand there, sir?
First of all, we're letting in economic goods come into Gaza. We're letting humanitarian goods as we speak now. With a ceasefire, without a ceasefire, we continue to have trucks and trucks coming in into Gaza. The reason there's been constriction of access to Gaza is precisely because they've used the incoming material, including cement or concrete, to build these tunnels, to build terror rockets, to build missiles and so on, from which they fire. Naturally, we have to make sure that such weaponry, such materials do not enter into Gaza. I think there is a path to get out of this once we have, I think the first thing is to accept the Egyptian proposal. That's the only game in town. What it will do is will enable us to actually get a sustainable ceasefire. That sustainable ceasefire consists of two things. One, demilitarization of Gaza. We want to make sure that there are no more additional rockets, tunnels, missiles, and so on. Otherwise, we'll be back here every few months. Second, economic and social relief for the people of Gaza. Now, if you want economic and social relief for the people of Gaza, you have to make sure that demilitarization works. Why? Because if the international community will rush again to give cement, concrete, to Gaza to build for Hamas to build the buildings, they'll use it for tunnels. So you have to have a mechanism to prevent the abuse of this cement or concrete. If you want to give them money, you want money to go to the people of Gaza. But if the money comes in and Hamas uses it to manufacture rockets and missiles, you're going to be exactly where we are now. So you need demilitarization and economic and social relief for the people of Gaza. I think that the economic and social relief is tied to demilitarization because otherwise it will simply not work.
But don't you worry, sir, and I'm not without taking sides on who's responsible for the civilian deaths, but that every time that as an Israeli tank shell or a missile hits a family and people are killed, that demilitarization becomes even harder, that there are going to be thousands of Palestinians, many of whom will have lost some of their civilians. And again, not saying who's responsible for that, but that's going to make the possibility of any kind of a peaceful situation in your part of the world even more difficult.
Look, we face a very, very difficult situation with a ruthless enemy. It's the same thing that you see with Al-Qaeda, with ISIS, with Boko Haram, with Hezbollah. These people just don't care. So we cannot pretend that we can allow them to continue to attack us, continue to fire rockets at us, continue to dig tunnels against us and say, okay, because we don't want to take action against them, they can continue this. What choice do we have? Obviously, we try to minimize as best as we can civilian casualties. They're all incidental casualties. None of them are a direct target. But we have no choice but to defend ourselves. And you're right, this creates a terrible tragedy when you have an enemy that deliberately wants to pile up its own people, it's the deaths of its own people as a human shield and as a battering ram in international diplomacy. The only thing that I can say is appeal to the people watching us to say, don't let them get away with it. Put the blame where blame belongs, on Hamas.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, thank you so much for talking with us today, sir. Always good to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Senior political analyst Britt Hume is here tonight with some thoughts on this entire process. Good evening, Britt.
Hi, Brett. As it seeks to suppress the rocket attacks from Gaza, Israel has a couple of handicaps. One is the behavior of the people of Gaza. The other is the government of the United States. The late Israeli diplomat Abba Eban famously said of Arabs that they, quote, never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Gazans certainly had an opportunity back in 2005 when Israel ended its occupation there, leaving that coastal region free to make something of itself. What it did was to continue shooting rockets into Israel and in 2006 elected the terrorist organization Hamas to run its government. Hamas proceeded to turn much of Gaza into a subterranean fortress in which to hide weapons and dig tunnels to sneak killers and kidnappers into Israel. Now it complains bitterly that Israel has blockaded air, sea, and land routes into Gaza. Israel says this is necessary to stop the flow of weapons. Its critics say the blockade goes well beyond that. The current warfare follows the collapse of John Kerry's efforts to broker a full-blown peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians, an effort that never seemed promising from the start. Israel now seems ready to see this fight through to the point of crippling Hamas militarily. Hamas counts on world opinion, swayed by the horror of civilian casualties, to force an early ceasefire and the lifting of the blockade. Kerry tried to sell that idea to the Israelis over the weekend. Surprise, he failed. Again. Brett?
But we saw the administration, what appeared to be walking back some of that deal after the Israelis, on a number of different media outlets, criticized the ceasefire that they said almost undermined the Egyptian ceasefire.
Well, the Egyptian ceasefire is one that the Israelis supported and Hamas rejected. So Kerry flies into the breach and ends up proposing, if that draft can be believed, and I think it can, something that is the Hamas blueprint. It's exactly what Hamas and its allies in places like Qatar wanted. And so it was unanimously rejected. And of course, you have to remember this. Public opinion tends to go against Israel worldwide, but not in the United States. The United States public opinion is about where it's always been in this conflict, and as in previous conflicts. So when an American administration gets out ahead of itself and it seems to be operating against Israel, you'll see something like we saw today with the administration saying, gee, we didn't really mean that, or they didn't put it that way, but that's what it comes down to. It was a blunder.
Thank you.
You bet.